In late colonial India, 1930 to 1947, Indian nationalists communicated their animosity for British imperial rule through organized gatherings such as the Salt March. Through mass gatherings, Mahatma Gandhi and other Indian leaders were able to unite the people of India to communicate a strong message against British imperial rule. The Indian struggle for independence, in specific marches and collective demonstrations, were crucial to understanding modern peaceful protest today. Prior to British involvement in the politics of the Indian subcontinent, India was ruled by a Muslim empire known as the Mughals. The Mughal Empire officially ruled India from 1516 to 1856. British involvement in India was launched by the founding of the East India Company on December 31st, 1600, due to a charter by Queen Elizabeth I. In 1601, Sir James Lancaster embarked to India on one of the first trading expeditions of the company. He established trading posts that would eventually develop into a semi-functional government ruling on behalf of the crown. By the 18th century, the company had near full control of the Indian subcontinent and established monopolies over several Indian goods. Eventually, the company's power over India slowly began to disintegrate. The Sepoy Revolt of 1857 was very influential in causing the eventual fall of the company's sovereignty in India. The revolt began after British leadership updated the standard rifle to a rifle that required biting into paper cartridges that were made with animal fat to reload. This offended the Sepoys, the native Indian troops, whose religion prohibited the act of eating pork for Muslims and cow for Hindus. This offense, taken by the Sepoys, as well as the many other grievances they held for the company and their rule, sparked an unsuccessful but influential rebellion that made the East India Company look incompetent in the eyes of the British government. This revolt served as a harbinger to the political protests communicating Indian nationalism to the British colonizers. Queen Victoria I and the British government decided that it was the right time to reform India as a British colony, effectively ending the East India Company's influence over India, beginning the British Raj. Many nationalist revolts would compete with British domination and retaliation as the Raj continued to affect India and the people living there. In spring of 1930, non-violent Indian civil rights leader Mahatma Gandhi called for the reform over the devastating salt tax. Gandhi was an Indian lawyer born to somewhat wealthy parents, allowing him a comfortable existence that not many Indians shared. His passion for civil rights began when he was discriminated against while living in South Africa, becoming aware of racism and social issues brought on by British colonialism. Here he invented a policy known as the Satyagraha, meaning nonviolent political resistance. During the East India Company's rule, the East India Company's monopolies included such goods as salt. When the British government took India as a colony in the 1850s, they took over these monopolies, implementing taxes for the exchange of these goods. This was catastrophic for those in the lower classes, as it halted them from being able to afford the goods they needed, in particular salt. Gandhi asked the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, to change the salt taxation policies, but his request was refused. On March 12, 1930, a group of male Satyagrahis, followers of the Satyagraha, led by Gandhi, marched on foot to the coastal town of Dandi. As the group of 78 men marched 240 miles to Dandi, the majority of the inhabitants in the cities and towns they passed through watched the symbolic march proceed. The amount of marchers grew as they continued to Dandi. Once Gandhi reached the coastal town bordering the Arabian Sea, he grabbed a clump of sea salt and mud, boiling it in seawater, producing his own salt. Before the march reached tens of thousands of people, British authorities were largely unaware and ignorant about the major cultural influence the march would have in steering India towards self-rule, with even the Viceroy stating, "At present, the prospect of a salt campaign does not keep me awake at night." Gandhi hoped to unite all the people of India under one banner and push for independence and democratic representation. Years earlier, the British colonizers divided up the Indian people, embracing regressive and apartheid social orders such as the infamous Indian caste system that had been commonplace in Hindu India for thousands of years, dividing people from different social classes and backgrounds. The British also took advantage of the religious differences in India, allowing Hindus to struggle for power while the British took control of India. The Salt March was a good example of the Indian population coming together to stand up against British rule. Some Indians did not think a protest surrounding the commodity of salt was worth rallying the Indian people around, with even the future Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, later recalling after independence his lack of faith for the march. "We were bewildered and could not fit in a national struggle with common salt." Despite evident backlash from his fellow activists and India's immense cultural divides, Gandhi's communication was key in successfully uniting the Indian people, but the march did not come without a cost. 60,000 people were arrested in Dandi, including Gandhi. And despite these arrests, the march continued past Dandi, when an influential poet named Sarojini Naidu led a 2,500-strong group of marchers to the Darshan Assault Works, 150 miles north of Bombay, on May 21, 1930. The marchers were violently beaten by a force of Indian police officers. In January of 1931, Gandhi was released from prison, meeting with Lord Irwin in March. The two came to an agreement in which Gandhi would call off the march in exchange for the Viceroy Irwin giving him equal representation at a British conference discussing the colony's future. This equal representation in government was crucial to India's independence, as the colony would be eventually split up between the colonizers, the Indian Congress Party, and the Muslim League. This divided rule would eventually lead to India's division and independence as a whole. In 1947, after the Salt March and much other civil unrest, the British departed from the nation of India. However, there was the matter of dividing up the complex state. India had a large Muslim population, but the nation was majorly made up of Hindus. During the time of the Raj and East India Company, the British viceroys and local rulers divided up the two religions, furthering their cultural divides and differences. People such as Gandhi hoped to unite the Indian people under one banner, but their cultural divides of the two people were too strong, and after the British left, the two peoples split up into 3 different countries: India for the Hindus, Pakistan and East Pakistan, later Bangladesh for the Muslims. These 3 nations still contain a bitter tension between one another, caused majorly by the catastrophic effects of the Raj. After the loss of India, the British Empire was reorganized into the British Commonwealth, a coalition of states that were all intent on supporting each other. Decolonization and the restructuring of the British Commonwealth contributed to an overall better standard of living for many of Britain's colonial subjects. The British Raj, especially the Salt March demonstration, serves to remind people that march and communication is key in making political and social change. Gandhi united the Indian peoples against British colonialism, but didn't do it with weapons or hate. He didn't even try to cause harm to his enemies, and this in many ways strengthened his own agenda. Gandhi successfully united the peoples of different cultural backgrounds and religions to retake their homeland of India. And eventually, despite the British's ill-conceived impression of the nationalist, Gandhi managed to gain his nation's independence from Britain, but the split from the nation was hardly neat and tidy. Despite Gandhi's valiant efforts to unite the people of India, Hindus and Muslims retained much division and at large were not interested in uniting. This eventually led to the creation of not only India, but the predominantly Muslim countries of Bangladesh and Pakistan. Despite this major shortcoming in Indian independence, Gandhi should still be congratulated for his efforts. He accomplished in uniting a nation against a brutal colonizing regime, and did this without violence or chaos. Gandhi's actions can still be remembered in the United States of America as they inspired the civil rights protests, which brought an end to mass-scale segregation in the U.S., caused largely by peaceful protests such as sit-ins and freedom rides, where young people protested segregation on public transit and in restaurants. These protesters would ride buses desegregated and sit in white lunch counters without any violence, just campaigning for their rights. This mirrors the Satyagraha, in that it is a powerful protest for political change while not endorsing violence. In general, Gandhi was largely responsible for inspiring peaceful protests as an effective kind of demonstration, and although many demonstrations still resort to violence, such as the treasonous insurrection on the Capitol this January, many follow Gandhi's way of peaceful protest to this day. Gandhi will remain a powerful beacon. The actions of Gandhi at the Salt March have seemed to prove enormously influential to this day. Without the people of India coming together on a united front, Britain may still have ruled India and its many other colonies to this day. Gandhi's actions of uniting the Indian peoples against the British colonizers stand today as a key instance of communication in history and inspiration to people who are living under harsh regimes such as in North Korea, Russia, and China, and a beacon of hope for the Indian people who in many cases are victim of a very evident poverty gap, with the majority of the population living in poverty. India's economy, however, continues to improve, giving hope to a better life for many.